Okay, now what we're going to do is find the exact value for the trig function of each of these angles. This is actually exactly the same thing that you did in the previous section. It's just in the previous section you did this when the angle was given to you in degrees, whereas here it's given to you in radians. But other than that, it is exactly the same as section 3.1. All right, so first of all, I want to know what 2 pi over 3 is as far as degrees. I just know you're going to think better when it's in degrees. And then we'll talk about reference angle, and we'll talk about what quadrant we're in. Now remember what I pointed out to you a while ago. You notice you've got the pi over 3 here, and we know that pi over 3 is 60. So if I do 2 times 60, then that gives me 120 degrees, okay? Now, you need to know the reference angle for 120 degrees. So if you can do that without a drawing, that's fine. If you need to draw 120 degrees off to figure out your reference angle, then do so, okay? But reference angle here would be 60 degrees, okay? Of course, again, you know that that's what it's going to be because you have the pi over 3. Again, I talked about that in just the previous video, okay? Now, main reason why I wanted you to figure out what it is in degrees is you're going to know what quadrant that's in before you know where 2 pi over 3 is. So 120 degrees is in the second quadrant. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to come up here and rewrite the problem using our reference angle. Now I'm going to leave a little bit of a space right here in front of cosine that I'll talk about in just a second. But you're going to replace your angle with the reference angle. Now, since this is in radians, then you are expected or supposed to write this in radians as well. So 60 degrees was my reference angle, which is also pi over 3. Now I'm leaving the space in front because that's where you have to decide, is this value going to be positive or negative? And that's going to be based on what quadrant you are in. So this is where the all students take calculus come in. You know, which trig functions are positive or negative in each quadrant. So you're in the second quadrant, and cosine is going to be negative in the second quadrant, okay? So we have rewritten this, or rewritten our given problem using our reference angle. So now this is where your table of values is going to come back in. And off of your table, you need to recall what cosine of 60 degrees is. And cosine 60 degrees is 1/2, but you would transfer over your negative. Therefore, your exact value is going to be negative 1/2. Okay, looking at another one. Okay, I have tangent of 5 pi over 4. So again, recognizing that I have pi over 4 here, and then I recognize I've got pi over 4, which is 45 degrees. So that means I'll have 5 times 45. Of course, the 5 is because of this, and pi over 4 is the 45. So if you do 5 times 45, you're going to get 225 degrees. Okay, my reference angle is going to be the 45. You remember you got pi over 4 in it right here, which is 45 degrees. And 225 is going to be in the third quadrant, okay? Now again, I'm just wanting to know the 225 just so I'll know for sure what quadrant I'm in, okay? So when I come to rewrite my problem, I'm just going to use the reference angle, and of course I need to know what quadrant. Now, I'm going to rewrite this with tangent 45, but remember 45 is pi over 4 in radians. If you're in the third quadrant, tangent is going to be positive. Now, of course, the plus sign would be understood when something's positive. You don't have to write it if you choose not to. Okay, now from your table, you need to recall tangent of 45 degrees is 1. And, of course, then this value we've already figured out is to be positive 1. So, for tangent 5 pi over 4, your answer is positive 1. Okay, still continuing basically the same thing, except what we're going to look at now, besides like a sine, cosine, or tangent, let's look at one of the other three reciprocal functions, like cosecant, secant, and cotangent. Now, the information that I've been figuring out over here, like with reference, angle, and quadrant, the way I process and figure all that out is not going to be any different, okay? So I see that I have pi over 6 in here, and I know that pi over 6 is 30, so that means I need to do 5 times 30 degrees, so that gives me 150 degrees, okay? So my reference angle, as I've already said, I see that I've got pi over 6 in here, which is 30 degrees, okay? And 150 degrees is in the second quadrant. Okay, so to rewrite this, I need to replace my angle with the reference angle. Now, if I'm in the second quadrant, now remember tangent and cotangent are going to do the same thing, so whatever tangent does, then just do the same thing for cotangent. So in the second quadrant, that's going to be negative. All right, so then you need to recall, and I'm going to put this in parentheses here because this is just kind of like what you got to think. What I want you to recall, though, from your table is tangent 30 degrees, okay? Because your table, remember, of values only contains sine, cosine, and tangent. So what you're going to do is recall this for tangent, and tangent 30 degrees is 1 over square root 3. So that means what you've got to do with this value when you go to answer the question here for cotangent is you've got to flip it. You've got to do the reciprocal. Now the negative, of course, is going to transfer over here onto the value. The reciprocal of 1 over square root 3, of course, would just be square root 3. Okay, let's look at one more of these. Okay, so this time I have cosecant of 3 pi over 4. Okay, so I see that I have pi over 4 in here, which is 45. So 3 times 45 is going to give me 135 degrees. Okay, so my reference angle, again, is 45, or pi over 4. But 135 degrees is in the second quadrant. Okay, so back up here, first of all, I know that this is going to be positive because cosecant is going to do the same as sine, and in the second quadrant, that's going to be positive. So I'll have cosecant of pi over 4. All right, so what you're going to recall from your table, though, is sine 45. Now, sine 45, you remember, you could possibly have memorized 1 over square root 2 or square root 2 over 2. Now, which of those two versions you use to answer the question here is not going to matter, but whichever one you choose, what you've got to remember to do is take it and flip it, do the reciprocal, because what we're trying to find here is cosecant, and this value would need to be positive. So what I'm going to do is just use this one, and I get square root 2.